After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
You ever get on the podcast sometimes and you feel like Dr. Manhattan just looking at Earth?
Is that the vibe we're going for this episode?
That's the vibe of my life right now. I guess if that's the one we're going with this episode, sure. But
Fair enough, yeah.
oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, when we were starting to write the concept for this one, I think we were gonna get into more of like a, presidential primary, US politics coverage, and we will be getting into some of that, but they kind of were able to shoehorn in a bunch of crazy stuff in the wake of all this Boeing stuff that's been going on, right? And like
Right.
that has been like the biggest tonal shift this year so far. And I'd say every new event has been a tonal shift, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, and like the Boeing stuff, it's interesting because it's like, air travel is just sort of something that we kind of take for granted, just as like a function of society and whatnot, that there's no like particularly high risk or anything like that, right? I mean, certainly there was like, kind of this post 9/11 scare and whatnot that it was, amped up, but like, statistically it's, relatively safe. But then you start having like all of these incidents that are, kind of all on the account of technical failures with Boeing jets. I don't know to the extent that the airlines might be culpable for maintenance, or if that's also under Boeing's purview and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, this has been like this kind of like evolving story in the background, because there's just like like every so often there's a new incident, right? Where it's like, you had the Alaskan Air incident. Very recently there was another, I think. I can't remember if the plane stalled or just crashed or whatever.
Yeah.
I think it was just injuries rather than, deaths, but still.
Yeah, it's like we missed covering a little bit of this, I think, when it was all going on during the pandemic, just because, like, there was a lot going on, and I guess, like, covering the what is that? I think the flight attendant strike might have been going on a couple years back and stuff, right? That like,
yeah,
there was like a little bit of an angle going on a couple years ago of, as a consequence of the pandemic, certain market pushes, certain, corporate like machinations that we just didn't have, enough eyeballs on, right?
well, I remember didn't they get like heavily subsidized during the pandemic?
Yeah, and I think
because of like, decreased air travel for obvious reasons.
Yep. And like I think what's come out as a consequence of that is like the aerospace sector, especially in like when it comes to like civilian aerospace travel and transport, has gotten this like really weird overstated influence on the market, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think like, I mean, this is the kind of stuff where it's like people will look at you like you're crazy for saying this, but I mean, the way things have been going, I think this is the only rational conclusion you can come to, right? Is like it's become too big to fail. And anyone who speaks up poses a threat to that market share, And if you look at it from like the cost of flights, the declining issues with safety and quality of service, and then also like as we're seeing with these Boeing leaks and whistleblower stories, the company's manufacturer, I mean Boeing in this case, from the manufacturer of airplanes, are cashing checks they can't, or like writing checks they can't cash, so to speak, right? They're rushing production. Safety standards are in the hole. I mean, there was one story of like the Alaskan Air door when it got reinstalled. The security footage covering that went missing. And
yeah.
There's just a whole bunch of like just weird things going on with that, right? And like, oh my gosh, like a friend of mine was supposed to be on that Alaskan Air flight, and it got like delayed. So they decided, okay, fuck it. We got it. We'll just rent a car and go drive to wherever we need to. They get to their destination. The next day, they check the news, And it's the story
Yeah.
of like the same flight with the door getting blown out, just being like, what the fuck?
Jesus Christ. Yeah, I mean sometimes things work out, right? It's some things happen for a reason, I guess, and you get those lucky breaks every so often.
Yeah, but it's like, it's a lucky break for this person, but it's also like,
Right.
what is it? Like the whole thing about air travel is that it was supposed to be like, for the most safe, reduced in
Hmm.
price. And other podcasts have covered this to some extent, right? Of like, as a consequence of regulatory capture, we've now hit the point where this thing that had an increased level of safety and lowered price, uh, is now doing the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really kind of it's abandoned, sort of the primary utility it once served. I mean, it still has obviously it gets you to where you need to go, more quickly than most competitors and whatnot, and certainly
Well, I mean, especially for international travel, it's your only
yeah.
option, right? Like, I mean, can you even take a boat anywhere anymore? I don't know.
That's what I've been wondering that for a while too. I honestly don't know where you can take a boat to, because I know like cruise ships, those don't really go anywhere. They just kind of like circle around things and whatnot. They might stop in like a harbor for like a day or something, or probably not even that.
Yeah, but no one's using them as like their primary mode of transit, right?
Well,
I
yeah,
think
exactly.
I think there still is, like, me and Sky were talking about this a while back. Like, there is a passenger ship from London to New York and back.
That makes sense.
And like, I don't know about the quality of service or like how fast it is, but that's probably the only of its kind, I would assume.
Well, then from there you can catch a train to mainland Europe, and that lets you open up some possibilities for more trains and vehicles.
I mean,
But yeah,
on
for the
the
most part, we're talking like, like if you really wanted to travel internationally, right? It is prohibitive outside of a plane.
exactly. And then even for domestic travel within the United States, like, not to, I mean, okay, it's time the socialists come out in favor of trains on this show, okay? We love folks, we love them. We love them. But like, it's kind of criminal, right? That like air travel has hit the point where it's your only realistic way outside of a road trip to get around within the country.
Yeah.
So it's like your option is a road trip because that's somehow faster than taking the train,
Well, and
or
like
take
it's like the issue is like with the trains, they only take you to very specific places, and then
yeah,
like if unless where you want to be is like in pretty close vicinity to the station, you're gonna need a car anyways.
exactly.
So it's like there's our rail infrastructure is particularly poor as a country, just in terms of like the layout and everything. Accessibility, and that was a conscious choice, right? It was prioritized to put more on the roads, and our automobile culture and whatnot. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
there's a whole lot to unpack there.
There's the whole Fordism thing to unpack there, and
Yeah,
like that's
exactly.
another segment for another day.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess I don't know, like maybe just to like quickly dive into the Boeing stuff, because this is yet another. I mean, do where is Pete Buttigieg in all of this right now? Because this falls under his purview, right?
Yeah, it should. And I'm trying to think, the last time I saw him recently, and we'll get into like the State of the Union a little bit later, but like he was like talking about the State of the Union response, which had like nothing substantively to do with like his department at all, I don't think. But yeah, he was on the news talking about that, and I was like, well, why did no one ask him about this? Like, this
Well,
seems kind of important. It's under his purview. Like, even if he, like, I mean, I'm not saying like, oh, he, can just, Green Lantern syndrome, fix it, but like, at least, a roadmap or, something.
well, it's like it's even less of like the Green Lantern syndrome in his case, and more of like when you get subpoenaed and get yelled at by a bunch of like congressmen for this kind of thing, right? Because with
Sure.
the Norfolk Southern thing last year, he was really running to Ohio to save face, right? And then I think even last year when there was the controversy
Well, I
about
mean,
like
he eventually was running to Ohio to save face
eventually it
because
took
he
him
was
it took
because
yeah it took him sweet time to do that. And then with this, you have increasing stories about Boeing's malfeasance and chicanery, right?
yeah.
Now, there's talk at the corporate like news level of like, when Boeing did a merger with another entity, I can't remember the name. Um, those shady business practices ended up becoming the organization-wide practices. And that's where we see the rise of some of this weird like lack of transparency and like cost cutting measures.
Yeah, maybe.
You're seeing European regulators being like, we're ready to like cut them out if it comes down to that. You're seeing just incident after incident with Boeing, and I think like shortly after the Alaskan Air like door blowout, they like sent some like executive of theirs. I can't remember what. It's like when they every time like there's like a when they had Obama drink the Flint water and be like it's okay.
Yeah.
They kind of did something similar with that, where like they get their exec to like sit in this plane, and they're like wearing. I don't know if they were wearing a mask or not, but they're just like trying to look as still faced as possible, while they're not sure if it's turbulence or like the plane's gonna explode.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like, I'm trying to think. Like, after, not just that, but there was some anecdote about a person realizing they're getting on like a Boeing like 787 and then telling the flight attendant, "Hey, I need to get off. Why? What do you know about this that we don't? I'm not privileged to say it, but I got to get off this plane, like that kind of shit." And then this most recent story, which this, I mean, it's insane to say the least, right? Is you have, and this feeds into like a larger discussion about how whistleblowers are handled in American affairs writ large, right?
Right. Yeah.
But like you had somebody, I think, was he about to testify or like give
Yeah. He
a
was scheduled to testify pretty soon.
okay, so he was scheduled to testify, I think, to like the transit safety, some kind of transit safety board or something like that, right?
Hmm.
And he is found with what was alleged to be like a self. Okay, let me not get into legal trouble here. He was found dead at a motel.
Hmm.
And people were kind of like, that's odd. How did that come to pass? And you had later, I think, a family friend come out and say that he had expressed worries about that kind of thing happening. So I'm like trying to find the best way to to say this, right? Which is like the stock answer and response would be like, well, they could be saying anything for attention. But I think in a broad sense, the answer I try to fall back on isn't, well, this, like, I can't say anything conclusive about this. That's not my job. What I will say is the appearance of such a shady narrative only furthers the lack of trust, right? If you're trying to
100%.
correct for this, you got to do things to win people's trust back. This is not how you go about it.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean it's as I said, it's very shady. Don't want to get into legal trouble or anything like that, but I mean, like, come on, it's such a it's such an odd like concurrence and whatnot that like it's hard to fathom, like, and
What
there's been reports afterwards about like, hey, this person said that he wouldn't do this explicitly, right? Which, I mean, you know take that as you would, but yeah, it's
the
again
fact I
as
have to take it as what I will, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, exactly.
and I think that's the thing is like if the question can be raised that was this person was there foul play possibly because he posed a risk to Boeing's profits allegedly.
Well, and
allegedly.
I think just the way Boeing has acted in all of this, right? It hasn't
Yeah.
acted with any real, like, sense of remorse or grace or really anything like that. It's been, just dragged out, like all of this, kind of, they're being dragged through this process to the extent that they're even going through any real, like, repercussions for this. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely, they've not created any semblance of like good faith for themselves.
Exactly, and that's basically like my final view on it is like, if the question can be raised, that itself is the problem.
Yeah. And
So,
some of this talk did remind me. I mean, gosh, do you remember when like this stuff was first coming out with Boeing, where like what the go-to, and I think to some extent like this reflects like what we were talking about with like whistleblowers too, where it's just like as a culture we don't really give them a whole lot of respect and whatnot, right? Like they're
Mhm.
not like they're treated as like inherently like bad people or whatever, and it's like I mean there's some situations like Snowden where it's like maybe it's a little bit more complicated in the sense that you could argue some type of national security concern or whatever. I mean, what he was exposing is still pretty darn awful, of course, but like when it comes to something like at the corporate level, when you have a whistleblower, it's like
yeah, this is less
insane.
ambiguous than that case for sure.
And it's insane the people who like will still go out and like attack people for like blowing the whistle and whatnot. Like it's you're great. You should be grateful that they even employed you or whatever. It's insane. But I remember like where a lot of like some of your conservative podcasts and whatnot were like, well, we agree this is actually some corporate malfeasance, but it's actually the DEI initiatives, and it's not like faulty tech.
How is
It's
DEI? Oh my god! Because I remember seeing some of that where like they tried to blame some of this stuff on like pilots being black, and it's like that
or
has nothing
women,
to do.
yeah,
Yeah, it has
like
nothing
just
to do with
insane
this.
stuff, yeah. And like they're still like going through that, and it's like and again, like it's what like just how poisoned your brain has to be to like kind of like think like, oh well, inherently if I see anyone who's not a white man in any job, I'm going to assume that they are there because of a diversity hire or whatever.
And it's like, okay, Ben Shapiro, if that's what you think, like what will
Right.
you then say when like faulty equipment kills your, precious white pilot? Then what?
Well, I'm sure. I mean, like, I'm sure a good chunk of these pilots were white that these
It's like
technical
that's what I'm
issues.
saying. Is like I think it's like, a pilot's expertise can't be tied to their identity, right? That's like practice,
Right.
experience, all
Well, I
that.
mean,
And then
and that extends to like everything, right? Like,
everything, right? Yeah, but it's like a faulty equipment, like I'm sure an experienced pilot might be able to do one thing with faulty equipment. I don't think they can do everything with faulty equipment, you know what I'm saying?
hmm
Especially like if like the fault is shoddy workmanship or the fault is like
right.
I don't know what it was. I think like in the case of this controversial um alleged suicide going on with the recent whistleblower,
hmm
I think the from what at least from what I remember people here talking about it was like he found like some kind of control panel that could like shoot metal like shards at people if something bad happened.
Oh,
So like you got like a whole manner of like faulty like just like not only like faulty equipment, but then
you mean that wasn't a feature?
not just that it wasn't a feature, but like if a fault occurs, the lethality is like along multiple lines. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and it's like I don't know. It's like with like we were saying about whistleblowers, and I think like this extends maybe to like how we should try to view the American legal system in effect, right? Is that it kind of does disproportionately benefit the powerful and the wealthy, right? Because let's say you do decide to take something to suit, right?
hmm
You have to have the financial resources to be willing to wage litigation for that long. You have to be able to put yourself out there and you put your reputation and public profile out there. And if you don't possess some of those resources, or if you're on like the lower end of the rung,
hmm
you are putting yourself in like big, just like major liability to challenge your opponents in the legal system, right?
Right.
And I think like for whistleblowers especially, like there's not much in terms of protection or remedy when it comes to backlash from the people they're trying to, counter.
Yeah, not particularly,
It,
unfortunately, and I mean we're kind of seeing that a little bit with like some of the woes of like the Trump legal cases too, right?
oh
It's just
yeah,
sort of,
oh yeah.
like where some of the cases where it's like, oh hey, let's just release the witness list. What's the worst that could happen? Like fully knowing that's like yeah, like you know that like his supporters are a bunch of like ravenous animals. Like let's not pretend that they're anything other than that. Like January 6th happened, and as much as we want to throw that aside.
I mean, and that's the thing about, how do you talk about support of Trump at this point, right? It's like they've kind of wrecked the Republican Party as a whole. They can't really play the facade of respectable conservative politics anymore as a result.
Yeah, or like Law and Order Party. I mean, and you like when they say it now, it's just like it's like the height of parody.
And I think like there's something like very funny about the basket of deplorables comment in the discourse that inspired back in 2016, right? Where it's
Mm-hmm.
like in hindsight, that's not to say I agree with Hillary Clinton, right? But it's like you were, there was this
Well,
weird.
and then like I mean, of course, you have like all of like the cringy like posts that you see constantly on social media from liberals, where it's like, she warned you guys and you didn't listen, and like, and you've seen them all, right? You've seen this post a million times for like every little thing that she said, as if she was some prophet, even though like anyone with a couple brain cells could have figured the same thing out.
There's that cringe angle, and then there's also the other one of like, when you say things like that, you dismiss like thousands of like silenced, working class and blue collar people, and I'm like, I don't know if those people necessarily are like the biggest like supporters of Trump. Did they go vote for him? We don't know. We're talking like we're ascribing virtue to people we don't know when we say shit like that, which I also think is like kind of a fallacy,
Well,
right?
I think there was a non. I mean, it's weird because like there hasn't really been. I don't. I mean, to my knowledge, I haven't really encountered any particular like studies that have really examined like Trump support from like comparing 16 to 20
Exactly.
because like I mean there was a lot of people like I mean like anecdotally that I knew who like voted for him the first time that absolutely didn't vote for him the second time because there was just sort of that like it's a joke. Hillary was just seen as like such a and they assumed she would win anyway, so they're just like like I don't like her, and it's just like let's just vote for the meme candidate or whatever. Let's just see what happens, right? Like let's roll the dice. Most of those people didn't vote for him in 2020, at least anecdotally. And I don't really know like in terms of in mass. I mean, obviously he had more votes in 2020, but I don't know where those came from because I know a lot of those people who voted for him the first time didn't do it again.
Here's my like guess I want to hazard. How many of those people actually did vote?
In 20,
Yeah, because I think like there's a lot of people who like
just
I
didn't
think
vote at all.
well just like there's a lot of like people who might present conservative but like could not be bothered to vote. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that there's. I mean, I think there's one or two people that I would know that like fit that bill. Well, they at least didn't vote in the like presidential race.
Mm-hmm. And even then too, it's like when you talk about like electoral politics and stuff too, like the studies and the pieces that come out about it kind of indicate that it's a certain kind of acculturation and class position that might lead people to be regular voters.
Sure.
And everyone else is more of like, if they do vote, it's more on and off. It's a little more irregular. It's not easily definable as partisan in any particular way. And then just again tying that back to the fact that a lot of people don't or can't vote, that just like factors
Mm-hmm.
into a lot of things. So it's like cultural presentation and then seriously being a Trump supporter is another thing too, right? But like if you look at who did January 6th, if you look at like the people who have like been his like loudest and most vociferous supporters, right? It's like smallholder, small business types, right? Particularly like small
Yeah.
business parents. So like I don't know, auto dealers, dentists,
Well, and yeah, and like I mean, small
our
business
beautiful
is such a
boaters.
yeah, small business is such a loaded term to
It
like
is. It
because
is.
it's because isn't our entire definition just rooted in like how many people you employ?
I think so. Yeah, because like I'm trying to talk about like a particular kind of guy, and even see that this is the problem with talking like politics in the American context. We're just talking about types of guys. But it's like I don't know. Like when Trump said, "Our beautiful boaters, we love them, folks." He was kind of really talking to the base at that moment.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure, right? I mean, I mean that you got that from Charleston and all those other awful events over the course of the Trump administration.
Yeah.
That
Well, then, yeah, the straight up Nazis for sure, of
yeah.
course. Which again, like they tie into the basket, I guess. But I think like I'm trying to think like because I mean I know we sidetracked a lot, but it's like if you try to like fit in like who is Trump's base, who is the like mythologized Trump supporter, it always does seem to be just like to be a white guy from the suburbs, right? Who like pitches a certain kind of like reactionary tendency that's like very inconsistent, very self-centered and self-focused.
Yeah, a bit. I mean, like he's the one of the hallmarks of his Canada's his extended candidacy, as it were, is that he has really solidified the rural areas, right? Like the rural vote has like really become a firm Republican area, which is like, it kind of feels like, oh, well, yeah, of course. But like it's, if you look at it, there's a lot of like, there used to be a little bit more divide there, but now like the rural urban divide is like really etched in stone. But I
Yeah.
think, yeah, like in terms of like, when you really think about like who his like most vociferous supporters are, I mean, I think it is like kind of those like suburban white dudes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Which is I guess like again, not to like keep pounding the drum for like culture war as like the only thing we talk about on this show, but I think culture war is the only way you can kind of understand how polarized party politics has become in the United States.
Yeah, I think I think yeah, that's really kind of an expression of it, right? I mean, I think that's as much as like kind of people's like poke fun at the culture war and they see it as kind of this thing that like really lacks any value to like engage with. Like it's to me, it's really kind of at the heart of polarization, probably more than anything else, right? I mean, obviously, like there's certain like policy issues and whatnot that are also reflected in the polarization, but I think really like where it's rooted in is in those culture war issues for various reasons.
Yeah, and I think this is probably going to feed right into like the next thing we're going to talk about, right? But it's like these questions of like, is culture downstream from politics or vice versa? And like I haven't read enough Gramsci to like really come to any conclusive position on that, right? I'm kind of just trying
Yeah,
to
I mean the vibe is kind of maybe more so that I think we're starting to see it. I don't know. I mean, like there's because like some of it feels a little astroturfed. Well, a
yeah.
lot of it's astroturfed, right? But it definitely seems like the I mean, it is always going to be that chicken and the egg scenario, but I think definitely we've kind of seen like, particularly on like the Republican side, right? You've seen them cultivate like particularly like a particular type of culture, let's say, and I think that culture has sort of become like the true believers in politics have sort of they emerged from that ecosystem, and those who kind of were just like we're playing to these guys for just political brownie points. I think they've been finding themselves increasingly sidelined.
Mm-hmm. And I think we also talked in the past about how like this ties into things like, consumer identity
Sure.
and, different sides of the culture war take part, you know, probably to the same degree in consumerism, because that's just the point of engagement with our economy at this point.
Hmm.
But also, you know, different brands will appeal to different sectors of the culture war. You know, different brands end up becoming actors, if not, you know, doing some kind of astroturf struggle within the framework of that. And I think like media ends up being this weird, I don't like the word liminal space anymore, but if there is a quote unquote battleground of the culture war, it is media, in social media, right? So in some sense, like, I don't like to believe that what you see on the internet is reflective of anything in reality, or that what people post indicates anything that's broad or generally true, right? But people can self-select to get on the internet and then display their behavior inside within this
Hmm.
polarized context, right? So, I mean, we're going to talk about TikTok. That was how I was planning to segue into this, right? But you know,
We've just killed the segue. We're just like, yeah, we're talking about TikTok now.
yeah, it's just there's no subtlety. There's no fucking subtlety anymore, right? It's like
Not on TikTok, at least.
not on no. That I mean, that's the thing that always got me about TikTok as a medium is like there's no subtlety. There's this real weird hollowness and soullessness to it, but it does something that appeals to American cultural neuroses so effectively that like people are dropping like way too much information about themselves way too fucking comfortably on this site.
I
And
mean,
you're doing like
that's
a
kind of
choreograph.
been that's
Oh, go
kind of
ahead,
been
go ahead.
social media, right? Like pretty much, really since like Facebook really took off. That's kind of been like the
I mean, since MySpace, I guess, right? Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, like Facebook was like kind of the bigger one. I would
Yeah, just
say
getting into
that.
feuds on main, yeah.
Right? Yeah. God. I mean, there's some of my friends, and I like we'll share like old screenshots of like stuff that one of us posted and whatnot, and there's some treats there. Like, you know, there's it's like, yeah, this is what happens when you have, you know, teenagers and like, you know, some of the worst years of their life in some cases that are just angry with each other, and
Just
there's
doing it online, yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I think I guess like what the point I was trying to make in the segue with this is that there is this like I don't have the psychoanalytic language for this, so I'm not going to try to go like accurately with this, but the word that's coming to mind is like anguish, right? Is that with third wave politics kind of dominating the American political space, you know, people are kind of passively trying to see these struggles sublimated through like the teams they vote for and like the politicians that they kind of see as their champions. But in handing over that vote, right, and handing over that action to them, there's like this anguish that gets born between seeing the fights go down and seeing nothing change, and then you need to sublimate that through the internet and through the media you consume, right? And I think like with all like the real like histrionic fuss that the right has made over things like trans people,
Mhm.
over abortion, over whatever their culture war bugbear is of the day, right? They have created this market for like conservative media, right? That in of itself has become how like it's become the point of engagement for the American right to some extent, right? Like
Mhm.
you won't only just see people in like Trump hats; they'll be wearing like a Daily Caller shirt too. You know what I'm saying?
Sure, yeah.
And I think like it's so much of like right wing politics is, I think even before like you don't really see this as much with Democrats for whatever reason, but I could be wrong. maybe it's because like MSNBC is so hegemonic for the liberal space, but like because of things like talk radio and Fox News, like the right has been like it's had this like parasitic relationship to right-wing news media for a while now that has really mutated the game to some extent. And I think we're seeing that play out not only in social media as a whole and through, you know, phenomenons like how the Trump years have played out, whether it's Trump's own social media use, whether it's like how toxic online spaces have become, whether it's the use of the internet as this discursive space that, you know, further complicates everything. We're also just seeing social media and the control of social media become this like battleground within the American political space. And I think we're seeing that play out in this controversy and like what I can only call a delayed moral panic over TikTok, right?
Yeah, and I guess that was quite a bit. So I'll rewind slightly into
I rambled on that
like I
one.
mean,
Don't
obviously,
worry.
like the conservative talk show radios, that stuff's been around for a long time, right? I mean, you can draw the line right back to like Father Coughlin in like the
Yeah.
40s and before that too. And so like that's always been around, and there's been a lot of debate over kind of why there hasn't been like an equivalency on like the left. I think
Well,
the
we
closest to
have one.
consensus, what would we say is the
It's less of like I don't know because I would say MSNBC is probably the most hegemonic of the bunch, but I
I
think
think that's probably fair.
I'd also say the point of engagement is a little different because at least my theory is with formations like the New Left and stuff. I think media consumption for its own sake is something people value. This idea of being well read is kind of something that what we call the American left values. So there's like so many more publications with different niches that like people can consume. I don't know what the equivalent is to that on the right, and we can get
Yeah,
into that.
that is fair. But I meant like in terms of like talk radio and whatnot, there's always been
Yeah,
kind of debate over why like there hasn't been like an equivalent really that's been nearly as successful on the left as like Limbaugh or Alex Jones or whatever. And like I think the consensus has sort of been that like um like I don't know if it's like it's kind of in like the political psychology territory. Some people think it's like more so just that like liberals engage more with visual medium and whatnot, but I think even what you
possibly.
said, right, with being well read and whatnot, like maybe there's just the idea that they consume such a broad and sometimes niche interest and whatnot that it makes it harder to sort of capture. There's not anything that's as like all consuming as there is like on the right, where it's like they're all sort of in like the same you know think space, as it were.
Yeah,
um
because like not to interrupt you too, but like
yeah.
even with like right wing political media, they try to make like an ecosystem, right? So like
Hmm.
if you're a PragerU guy, they try to get you in their ecosystem, and then they sell you the kids' books on top of that too.
Right.
If you're at the Daily Caller, if you're in their network, they have 10 to 15 hosts whose content they want you to consume. So maybe the business model plays a role. I don't know.
Yeah, it very well could. I mean, I didn't really think about that particular angle, but I think that's a good point as well. um but yeah, I think when it comes to like the TikTok stuff specifically, kind of getting into that is it is sort of this delayed moral panic. Really, what we've kind of seen, like, and I said I don't personally use TikTok, right? But like, and I've always been kind of skeptical of it, as like just sort of like
Hmm.
this is not necessarily skeptical for the reasons that our politicians
Definitely not for the
are
same
claiming
reasons.
to be,
Yeah.
but like like we're in the sense where it's like sort of like not to be all like moral panic or whatever, but like I was kind of like it's like, is this just sort of like the slop that has like become American Western culture as a whole, right? Is this
Yeah.
like
Oh,
just sort of
we did the woke moral panic instead of the regular moral panic. That's what we did.
right, yeah, and like not like in a way of like, oh man, like my kids are like worshiping the devil or whatever, but like in the sense of like like gosh, like this is what we've been reduced to, is just like
Slop.
Yeah, like just the complete slop, right? Um, and like it's that being said, I will acknowledge that there's been some successful-ish organizing efforts that have been done from this, right? And
Yeah.
like it's um the first one that really kind of brought it on everyone's radar was, and I mean, was this a meaningful protest? I don't know, but it was that Trump rally, the first one in the pandemic, where like all the
Yeah.
TikTok people had registered that they were attending and they obviously didn't show up. So the audience, they got this huge arena and couldn't fill it
Mhm.
for it. And like that was sort of when everyone was just started like, oh wow, like this platform is awful. Like how could they, you know, it seemed like there was definitely some political intent behind banning it that early.
Yeah.
And more
Yeah.
recently, right, you've been seeing it as like a key vehicle for like exposing stuff with like the Israel-Palestine conflict, right?
Mhm.
That's been where a lot of the clips have surfaced is through TikTok first. It seems to be a lot of the primary objections to it seem to be rooted in the fact that like, hey, yeah, not to get into like this, like, oh, it's, the Jews want you off, TikTok or whatever, right? Because that's definitely the direction I've seen some people, particularly on the right, take it.
Yeah.
Um, but like, yeah, I mean, like undeniably, right? It seems to be like once this got into everyone's sort of the American consensus issue, right? Which is just sort of our position on Israel as a whole. Um, that's when it seemed to get a lot of traction to ban it. And of course, there's the fact that it's owned by, I guess, a Chinese company. The bill to ban it specifies that it has like 6 months or something to sell, or to like for other investors to buy it. Apparently, one investment group is headed by Steve Mnuchin uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
to acquire it. So basically, which is like, this gets into a really interesting territory when it comes to just sort of it's funny for all the people who are like, oh, they don't want like the government like picking winners and losers and stuff like that in the economy. Here you are explicitly having like the government forcibly sort of act to change management of a company and whatnot. And it's funny because it's like there's definitely, I mean, obviously we know that X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, has a lot of like Saudi money in it,
Yeah.
and whatnot. And like we know these other social media sites are also engaging in sort of like algorithmic promotion and suppression of different things, which is what their objection is here, right? That it's like being done to influence the American public or whatever, supposedly through the algorithm. You had that ridiculous figure from Nikki Haley during that debate where she said that like for every, was it 15 minutes on TikTok, you become like 15% more anti-Semitic or
Some nonsense like that. Yeah. Yeah.
whatever it was, right? And just the idea that like literally like there's some statistical tie to becoming more anti-Semitic the more you consume on TikTok, as if like that's all that you see on TikTok is people just talking about Israel Palestine. And like
No,
again,
I
I'm
mean
not on.
most of like fucking TikTok is like really it really is just slop.
Yeah, I mean I don't have the app, but I guarantee you're not being like just bombarded with like the IDF ripping apart people's homes or whatever. Like it's gonna be slop.
Yeah. It's I don't know. I'm definitely not on TikTok either. I have the same approach to the site where I've always been skeptical of it, but content will always make it off of TikTok to other platforms.
Exactly.
And as I've been less, online, I have noticed that like there is this contradiction in how Americans talk about TikTok versus like the incessant need to keep producing and consuming like short, easily digestible, and most importantly, like neurologically hijacking style content, right? Because like and here's the thing, right? Because it's like this is not a conspiracy like theory here. This is just like marketing at work, right? Where it's like if you, for whatever reason, they figured out that if you look at a video that takes up the entire content of your screen, You get the people talking in that weird TikTok voice. The did you know? If you try, like, it just does things to the brain where it's like this person isn't done talking, so I'm going to stick around and like listen to this.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like for all sorts of like things, like the thing about TikTok, like any social media, is it exists to sell fucking products.
Right.
And the collection of data is not incidental, it is by design, and like there like people have kind of very smartly said like, oh, so the problem isn't that they did it, the problem is that it's not it's not American companies getting the data, it's someone else. But also like the thing about the Chinese opium narrative that's going out around about TikTok, right, is like, if it's really like that, then why haven't we, why is no one saying undo like the Richard Nixon deal with Deng Xiaoping?
Yeah, I mean for sure, and I mean
there's so much like, I mean, I'm not here to defend the Chinese government, okay, but there's a new like, I mean, it's been going on. It's not even that new, but it's been going on for a while, right? Where it's like you beat the drum for war with China, you beat the drum for let's start a proxy war in Taiwan, and it's like, listen, there's criticisms that can be made of the Chinese government. There's criticisms that can be made of the modern Chinese state. The thing is, I know for a fact this is all hot air if like there's this like two-way like interdependency between China's economy and the United States' economy.
Yeah.
To actually do something about that. And frankly, doing something about that would be disastrous for the United States.
Exactly.
It's like there's, I don't know, it's like the only thing I can describe it as is like it's the convenient racism of the American state at times to like throw your non-white ally under the bus when things are going bad, but then expect them to like ship everything to your door by tomorrow. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a fair, cynical way to break it down. But I mean, you're right. I mean, it's like there's a codependent relationship that they're not. That like we like it's always been this convenient thing to like throw hot air at.
Yeah,
because it rallies the public around your more jingoist members of in the political life and stuff like that. And yeah, it's a convenient political tool more than anything else. And you're right, like it's American companies do this. They influence the public. They collect data and all that stuff, right? It's just that it's like, well, it's Chinese, so that's dangerous because it's a pseudo adversary, but not really in that space. Yeah, and I think too, like it was like as you were kind of like the only thing I would add too is like you mentioned sort of like there's this demand for like the type of content that TikTok produces, and it's like the what third or fourth platform that's like explicitly just that kind of content, right?
Well, because like Instagram and
Vine.
Snapchat.
Well, and yeah, like you Snapchat's kind of fallen off quite a bit now that I think about it.
Yeah, because the thing about the real format is like
obviously like YouTube has adopted it, Instagram has adopted it, as you said. Most I think even Elon was talking about like copying it too, basically.
Oh God. Yeah, and it's like because it's an effective vector to sell products, right? And that's the whole thing where I mean, you know it, like the whole regulatory history of like trying to get any traction on regulating tobacco, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely like, if not the same dynamics, it echoes with how social media has failed to be regulated in the United States, right? Where one, you have the gerontocracy that doesn't understand how it works, but then also like what you're asking the American state to do if you want something done about this is you're basically admitting that technology has been given to the American consumer by the dictates of market logic and not out of necessity or not out of any way that is healthy or enables them to like hold the power over technology and not the other way around, right?
Hmm.
And to admit something like that it flies in the face of the dictates of capitalism. You know what I'm saying? And we've already talked about that. It's sacrosanct. You don't dip into anyone's profits in America. You definitely don't imply that consumer goods might actually be unsustainable and harmful to people. You know, so it's again like I I would always joke to this guy that like I do agree with the TikTok ban, but like not for the reasons that any of these people are talking about, right? And it's a question that I've been running into in my
Well, and
personal
our
life.
objections to TikTok would just be substituted by whatever like American replacement emerges from it, or more acceptable national replacement for it would be.
Yeah, because it's like the same dynamics we're seeing with TikTok. Like these came up in like the clone apps you were mentioning, right? Like whether it was Dub Smash or Musically, like the same like weird toxic community dynamics would emerge in those apps too, right?
Hmm.
So you know, there's already an existing discourse about things like once they become normalized, no one cares about the enormous social costs they pose on our society, right? Like the minute America goes car dependent, automobile accidents become a new like facet of life. Automobile
Yeah.
deaths become a facet of modern life, right? So then the same thing with social media starts to occur, right? Where it's like you can't really have uh, a public profile or a public interaction with the world without some kind of online presence where you're always reachable. You
Hmm.
can't, produce content without um some kind of, involvement in the tech space. If you run a business, if you are trying to run a nonprofit, if you're even engaging in the economy, you're like plugged into the system in ways you can't really get out of, right? And unpacking that question would reveal way too many contradictions. And like this is the thing I keep running up against because like I'm basically off of Twitter at this point. Like I just have the site to post updates and like send DMs, right? The minute
Yeah.
Musk does something to piss me off, or the minute like they decide to ban me for whatever reason, like I'm off of the site.
Well, and it's always so arbitrary. It's not like you were like active in a way that should have ever put you on like the radar to get banned.
Yeah, but it's also like the other thing that's getting me too, right? Is like, I mean, again, to maybe bare my soul to the audience a bit, right? Is like now that I've freed myself of the need to like be validated socially, I'm I'm purely doing this for fun at this point. I'm purely doing this as an intellectual exercise, you know? And it's a lot more fulfilling to do it that
Way
way,
to just
but
like flex like, your enlightenment and whatnot. Like, oh yeah, I don't require social gratification anymore. Like, what a dork.
thank you for keeping me humble. But it's like there's just an element to modern life that necessitates using the internet and using social media, right?
Yeah.
And who's going to do something about that? Like I remember talking about this when we had the Mind Games boys on the first time, and they were talking about it in the context of like, iPads kind of being forced on kids and stuff, right? So it's the
Yeah.
same thing where it's like, as our society becomes more technologized, it's happening at the dictate of the market. It's not happening in a way where people have control over it. It's not happening in a way where people can understand the effect it's going to have on them. I mean, people talk about shit like screen addiction all day, but like, and we can do the 12-stepification of all aspects of American society and say it's a failure of, personal discipline and whatnot, but it doesn't address the gaping hole that is like the failure of the regulatory state in all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. And like, I mean, just like there was this willful desire to sort of, take advantage of, maybe the fracturing of willpower and, personal discipline and stuff like that too.
Yeah. Which is, and that's the thing, right? Where it's like, I think like the pandemic onwards has been like like a realization, and like we've seen how the the dynamics of human interaction can change in the blink of an eye, right? we've seen how like being too online can really get people in like the wrong headspace. We've seen how valuable and how valuable human, interaction is. And we've also seen like how precious little we have of it as a consequence of like our modern life,
Mm-hmm.
In having this like heavily individualized society, we somehow like, are always able to keep up with one another, but we never really know how one another are doing. And that's, I mean, I don't, again, because not to get woo woo with all this, but this is where, politics intersects with everything else, right? And it's like, what do you do to address the spiritual poverty that such a society creates? I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, I think that's fair. There's like a lot of mysteries with how that's gonna work, and I think it's sort of Pandora's box, right? I don't think there's really any putting that genie back in the bottle or anything like that.
Exactly, exactly. And I think like that's the kind of thing where it's like, well, if it's here to stay, then let's demand a system such where people have the control over it and not Elon Musk. Anyhow. All right. So back to this year's presidential primary coverage. So State of the
Over.
Union. It is. It basically is at this point. Like
It's a done deal at this point.
I mean, I was definitely under no illusions that the Republican primary was going to be contested for much longer. Like at least for most of this year, but I didn't expect Haley to drop out this soon. Then again, how long was she gonna last?
Yeah, and like I mean, I've always talked about right where I was always torn on like some people said that there's value for like her personally sticking in as long as she did or even longer. Um, I kind of question if it was just like doing long term brand damage to her brand, which I mean, far be it for me to stop her from doing that. Um, but yeah, it's interesting to see kind of how that's shaped out in the end. Um, I kind of expect. I think really what did it was just sort of like seeing. I think was it like right after the Supreme Court announced that like the immunity case, like how long it was going to
Yeah.
take for them to consider, or that they were considering it, and like when they were considering it. I think that like pretty much just shattered like any concept that
Yeah,
they would
yeah.
like you know the idea that they would even like bother like that he's going to go to jail or anything like that, right? And there's a lot of the fact that all of those things are who knows if any of that's even gonna like any of those legal cases are really going to happen before the November election. I mean, obviously they were not going to happen before the convention, which kills her window of opportunity.
Yeah, it's like the the fallout of Trump's legal like cases, especially with his immunity stuff, and then also the various I think what was it? The Supreme Court struck down Colorado's decision to
Yeah,
take him off the ballot, right?
yeah, and I think we talked about that last time, right?
I think we did to some extent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
So
I was gonna say like that one like I don't disagree with necessarily the philosophy, but like it's also contrary to like where else they have outlined that philosophy. You know what I mean? Where it's like they've given states such broad windows to make legal rulings and stuff like that regarding elections and changing
yeah,
election laws. But like this is like one thing where they're like, oh well, you can't do that.
I mean
Uh,
it's very obvious who the court is in the tank for at this point. I don't.
no question.
It has been obvious for quite some time, and I think like we've said in past episodes, if anyone is shocked by the court's decisions and you're hemming and hawing about the alleged neutrality of the court, you're not going to make it, especially not now. Um, I was going to say too, like the other like unique aspect of the Republican primary so far and I don't know if this is like if there's a historical precedent for this, right? But like Trump basically doing a side quest and racking up magic items with his court like cases.
I don't know if it's racking up. It's like racking up debuffs or something like that.
Something.
With those
I
like
didn't say they were good magic items. I didn't say that.
cursed items.
Cursed items. No enchantments.
Yeah.
Oh my god. But it's like, yeah, like he's over there on the side quest, somehow still getting like the majority of the Republican base at this point.
Right. I mean, he's been sleepwalking through like the actual like electoralism stuff, right? There's not been
Yeah.
a super strong effort to campaign or anything looking like that.
Which is, I think, like a unique aspect of the Trump campaign, and then also like again,
For sure. And it's so different from like what you're used to with him.
it's so self-organized in like I don't know if we've seen a formation like this, especially in like modern electoral politics. I'm trying to think of like past equivalents in like other countries that might line up with this, but like Trump people are very self-organized.
I mean, kind of. Like, I mean, I guess when it comes to
Yeah,
like
let's
turning out
qualify
to
that.
vote, right? Like, I think that's fair. But like beyond that, like, I wouldn't. I'd hesitate to call them organized in terms of like actually like. But heck, I mean, even like, I mean, I guess the insurrection too, right? I mean, that was pretty self-sufficient. Like,
Yeah, I guess my language deserved to be qualified there for sure, but there is like a self-directed quality to it, if that makes sense.
yeah, I think that's fair. Because I mean, like, organized. I'm like, well, like, I mean, they're not like. I mean, even if it's just like, well, they're organizing for evil or whatever. I'm like, they're not really doing that much though. But like, yeah, like the 1 to 2 times a year that they have to like really,
Well, even the stuff on the
organize.
border, right? Like, I don't know
Yeah,
if like that was directly to. Where does Greg Abbott stand in like the Trump circle of evil?
like, what do you mean?
Like I don't think Greg Abbott has ever like tried to make himself, look like a Trump guy. You know what I'm saying? Even if they might have identical politics, right?
I think that's fair. Um, yeah,
Because like
I think I would agree with that. Like, he hasn't like they obviously share that same like political space, but like he's not like he never really like ingratiated himself as like a hardcore loyalist or anything like that. He never did anything contrary to that either. But it's not like DeSantis where you had like sort of the really close to the Trump orbit, then out of it, and then trying to get himself back in. You had
yeah,
none of those things.
it's more like Trump opened the breach and then Greg Abbott rolled in. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah, I
like
think that's fair.
and it's like I think the thing
Oh man,
about that
what your ableist joke? Wow.
I didn't even realize, fuck him. Fuck Greg Abbott. I'm sorry. Anybody else, with a disability, I would never say anything like that. But Greg Abbott, fuck you. When that tree fell on him, that was a fucking sign from God. You made your choice.
Have you we actually did this on Greenhouse Gaslighting because both my co-hosts live in Texas and neither are a fan. So I didn't know he was in a wheelchair at that time. But two, if you go into his campaign web or his like just his website, it
Let's
has
pull
like
it
a whole
up.
story about the tree falling on him and whatnot, and how it's this story of like triumph and persevere. If you just look up like Greg Abbott wheelchair,
Oh no. Let's
yep,
Houston.
right there.
Oh, here's Greg. Yeah, it's his
Yeah,
campaign. There you go.
why is Governor Greg Abbott in wheelchair?
On a summer day in July 1984, there's that number again. Governor
Oh my
Greg Abbott,
god.
a 26-year-old recent law school graduate, decided to take a break from studying for the bar exam by going for a jog in West Houston neighborhood, as he'd done many times before. That accent was off. That was like a more of a Virginia planter accent. I'm sorry. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, the Texans. Oh my god. I think so. The thing about Greg Abbott that I was trying to get at, um, is that when Trump opened the window for like just naked fascism, um Abbott like saw the opportunity and took it. You know what I'm saying? Rather
Sure.
than ingratiate himself into Trump's orbit. And I think like there's definitely other Republicans who may have done similar things. They're not coming to my head right now, right? And then the other option was rather than jump into the breach, you basically like become one of the evil wizard's minions. And that's what like Ron DeSantis did. You try to
Yeah.
become a Grima Wormtongue style character, right? And I think like with Greg Abbott jumping into the breach, there's like a dark magic that goes into it where he's like, now I'm just going to like use the same playbook and use the same tactics. So like, Trump starts deploying especially because you have like the different fascist Steves in Trump's orbit. I can't remember, was it Steve Bannon or is it the other one who was like doing the Muslim ban and the different border policies? I can't remember. But
Oh gosh, that was early enough that I feel like it had to be Bannon.
if there's
But it
Bannon,
certainly, but it certainly wasn't anything that was like alien to anyone else in the Republican
yeah, I'm just
Party.
trying to think who the other evil twink was. It's not Jared Kushner. Who's the other evil twink? Anyways, so then like Abbott does the same thing where it's like, you're doing truck seizures, you're stopping shipments at the border. And then, Trump starts with the border as like his like rallying cry, and then Abbott fixates on the border, and then getting to the point where you're threatening a feud with like various federal agencies and you call up your own like loyal contingent of like boat dealers to like take up
Right?
arms.
Yeah.
Like that there's just something like there's something there that should be observed. I don't know if I did enough homework for this one, but there's something about you can either practice Trump's dark magic or you just stand there next to him. And Abbott took the former, not the latter option.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And that's the thing. That's the other thing too, right? Where it's like on the subject of Trump, like his absence in this contest, like has only made him more powerful. And in fact, like if you look at everybody who stood up against him, like they stand there basically humbled and embarrassed. Like who's checking for DeSantis anymore?
No one, and like I mean, I think for me, I think he's looking worse for wear even in 2028. Like, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but like to me, like I can't see that going super well.
Oh,
For
he
him.
blew it up for himself. He really did.
Yeah.
And then I guess I don't know this. This was going to be in the reading series if we got time for it, but I guess we should probably bring this up right now because this has gotten some traction, right? They're talking about trying to loop in Nikki Haley's donors and supporters into the Biden base for 2024.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think about this in the context of like the old Schumer strategy, right? Of for every blue collar, vote we lose, we will gain 2 in the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a regional play at first, but then here's like the ideological I mean, it's not even ideological so much as it is like I think a more blatant acceptance of the fact that
It's a
this
concession to me of like politics by aesthetic.
exactly. And like the thing that's getting me with this too, at least the way I'm thinking about this is as the more progressive or left wing factions of the American left are increasingly disgruntled and dissatisfied with Biden's tenure, this seems like a measured calculation of old school Democratic party thinking of the center has to be bigger than that contingent anyways. We can peel off enough votes to make up the difference. And I don't know if I don't know what the math is, frankly. But it seems like a very poorly made bet.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, the thing with this is where there's a little bit of a challenge is that I don't necessarily know what that's going to lead in terms of like, like what does it mean to try to court like Haley donors and I mean, are they even necessary? Right? Like, I mean, you are probably he's already out fundraising Trump. Trump has so much money that has to like go into other avenues, right? I mean, the RNC is like dedicating itself to just paying his legal fees as opposed to anything else that they could possibly be doing, right?
I mean, to the point that they're falling on like Democratic fundraising strategies and texting people for cash at this point now, right?
Right, which I'm sure they always did. I just wasn't on those text lists or email lists, right? Like I'm sure that's always been something that's like part of their lexicon of tactics. But yeah, I mean, there's that in terms of like her voters. I don't, other than him saying you're welcome to join the team, I haven't really seen him make any particular like appeals to her voters. And I think, to be fair, a lot of her voters even, and there has to be a concession in this, to the extent that like people voted for her in Michigan, right? A lot of those people were like Democrats who just wanted to like, protest Trump. I mean, I had students who told me that that's what they did.
Yeah, with the open primary, that is a tactic you can employ.
Yeah, and this was like this was the first state where there was an open primary. I think where did she end up winning? New Hampshire and Washington D.C. You know what I mean? Like it's a certain type of, not New Hampshire, Vermont. Yeah, because it was the swamp and the home of America's socialist is the only places that she succeeded in. Really great for the Republican base, I'm sure. But yeah, I mean, it's I don't necessarily know what those appeals are going to be. I mean, of course, like there's kind of questions of like if he really pivots hard into appealing them at the expense of the left, then that leads into problems. But I don't necessarily know what it's going to look like. And again, I think a lot of the Haley supporters were kind of types who just, I mean, in some cases they were Democrats or independents who just didn't like Trump. In other cases, I think they were just, Republicans desperate to sort of right the ship. And I mean, maybe that's enough motivation to say like, hey, well, if Trump loses, then maybe the ship's going to be right again, or they don't vote, or maybe they do vote for him. I don't know. But I mean, I don't think she did a particularly stellar job of trying to court the anti-Trump vote anyways, other than the simple fact that she wasn't Trump. But yeah, that's kind of, where I would weigh in on that. The State of the Union speech, I think.
Yeah, let's get into that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like this, like he made, as I said, just sort of like that broad appeal to them in terms of just like, hey, yeah, you know what, like you're seen, you should like come join this movement, basically, as opposed to like I'm going to adopt her policies. Because like, I mean, let's face it, right? She ran as like this principled conservative, like that's, and what's the appeal there for Democrats? In general, I mean, like you kind of, I think the State of the Union, like in terms of policy, was kind of what you would expect for the most part. He tried to make, references to like, the bipartisan border deal and all that stuff. And I think, like Republicans tend to fall into the trap of, being angry that he was supporting this and they're against it. He references Social Security. To the extent that Palestine was brought up, it wasn't much for what there was discussed. I think he said
the peer thing, right?
There was the reference to the peer, and there was just general discussion about like we need to really kind of care about like the humanitarian aspect of Palestine, right? So it's like saying the right things, but like talk is kind of cheap without action.
On that note too, because like this kind of ties in, right? Is like there was this like weird hot mic moment.
Yes.
Well, yeah. Let's get into the hot mic moment, right? Where he's talking
about Michael Bennett and Blinken.
Okay.
Where he said that like he's been talking. He said Bibi, we're gonna have this come to Jesus moment. Deeply anti-Semitic for him to suggest that, of course. Telling a Jew to come to Jesus, unacceptable in this media landscape. But yeah, so he's like talking about that where it's like there's that need to recalculate the war. And actually this happened, God, Wednesday? Thursday?
Yeah,
Schumer gave a
and
speech on the floor talking about the fact that he feels that Netanyahu is a danger to the safety of Israel and whatnot.
and this is the thing that's getting me is that like it feels
Also anti-Semitic.
but
Jewish Chuck Schumer.
allegedly, but it's like the thing that's getting me with it too is like the Netanyahu concerns were brought up even within Israel like months before all this, right? Like it feels very too little too late.
Well, and that's that America has always dragged its feet on this question, right?
Mhm.
Um, Biden had also drawn that red line on invading Rafah, which seems like they're going to do, much to a Fetterman's celebration.
Fuck that guy. I will confiscate Fetterman's Carhartt.
Yeah, I'm sure like there's a lot of saber rattling on the right. I just don't. I'm
Mhm.
just not in that particular like social media bubble. But like seeing like him kind of just go so hawkish, there has been like just the anti-gift that keeps on giving. Like,
And what's
just
his incentive for this other than like
I don't.
I don't understand what his constituency is that would like drive him to go that direction.
And like I get like traditionally there hasn't really been a whole lot of punishment for being pro-Israel in the United States, right? And like sort of the argument I've seen for like Joe Biden's career, like where he used to be much more staunchly like
Yeah.
pro-Israel, than he probably is now, was like that like if there's no punishment for doing this, and if you're in fact rewarded for it, might as well just go all in.
Right.
But I mean, in Democratic circles now, there's not a ton of benefit to it. I mean, there's some, like, right. I'm not going to pretend there isn't. I was actually talking about interest groups in class this past Monday, and we were talking about APAC, and then like one of my students asked about her senator, and just APAC was one of her top 5 donors. And I was like, man, like, unfortunately, Open Secrets doesn't have the current Congress up yet, but like, man, like, for Fetterman's sake, I hope they're paying him like all the money, right? Like,
Yeah, I hope he doesn't do the Biden thing of like Biden would sometimes do some of this stuff out of the goodness of his heart and get a windbreaker out of it. You know what I'm saying?
right? Yeah,
Like,
it's like because he like it's one thing to just be like I'm pro Israel or whatever, but like he takes every opportunity to toe like the Netanyahu line as hard as possible, and it's unfathomable as to why like what he thinks he's getting out of this, right? Other than like campaign cash, but like you can get that anywhere, right?
that's the
Like,
other thing in this too, right? Where it's like I think the APAC lobby's narrative about American support for Israel by design kind of conflates Israel with Netanyahu himself. It's not enough
yeah,
to like send the money to Israel. It's also like in the subtext of like making sure Netanyahu doesn't get held accountable, making sure that his reputation isn't tarnished, making sure that he can come over to the United States Congress as a citizen and give speeches whenever applicable, right?
sure.
So, you know, you had like the Michael Ritter clip come out like recently, right? Where he's like, I never liked this guy to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And he was kind of celebrated for his comments about Dianne Feinstein like earlier last year, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, you have members of like the Israeli government who, or I would say ex-members of the government who like have really nothing good to say about Netanyahu's tenure or even like his practices in office, right?
Exactly.
You have a whole host of evidence, anecdotes, analyses, and pieces that like basically say that like if in addition to like the right wing drift in Israeli politics, the single like personage of this guy has made things worse for everybody.
Oh,
But
for sure.
for whatever reason, like he is like the spoke that greases the wheels between like America and um these interest groups and the money making it over to, fund the Israeli occupation.
Yeah, and it's kind of wild too, where like I had seen something else discussing it recently, where they were talking about uh it was like after the Schumer comments about it, where like all these people in the States were like, oh, well, like the US like wants to like overthrow the Israeli government. It's like, how is like we're not even like talking electioneering activities, right? Like we're not like saying like, hey, if we successfully throw a coup in Israel, we'll give back funding or whatever, right? Like it's just saying like it's not even calling for like. I mean, his was very critical of him, like saying that he needed to step aside. But I mean, obviously, you could probably imagine that he would maybe be okay with him, just changing course on his actions, right? But like the fact that like we're not allowed to like that there's it's so difficult to criticize um him as a political figure in the mainstream, right? And that one video that you were talking about too, the Michael Ritter video, right? That I mean, I didn't even realize Netanyahu was tied to like propagating the misinformation that led to the war in Iraq.
I mean, you
And
can
it's
look
like
back
this guy
to
has a history of deplorable actions.
there's an interview of him, I think, against, I can't remember, there's some debate. It must have been with who's the one writer that I'm thinking of? I can't remember. But like I've seen clips of him brought up in like for context, right? Where like he's a lot younger and he's basically like, denying uh evidence or the realities of the occupation, right? He's denying
Yeah.
this idea of like, partly Palestinians in general, Arabs at large, having any humanity, right? He's always been in that bag. He's always been in that mold. And like I don't I can't speak to the source of certain APAC and uh Israeli cooperation strategies, right? But I don't know at what point this invocation of, if you even have even-handed criticisms of Israel's policies or behaviors, you are inherently anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Because with the minute you throw that,
And Chuck Schumer got those anti-Semitic charges. Chuck Schumer of all people.
how in the hell, like he literally like went to, okay, this is the funny thing about that is he went to the same high school class as Norman Finkelstein. You know what I'm saying? Like it's the same like strategy being deployed so blindly and so like wantonly that like you say it with like no regard for how ridiculous it sounds at a point, right? Like this, and like Chuck Schumer has basically done everything they've asked up to this point, and then on a hot mic or even in,
Well,
like,
that was a
measured,
floor speech.
that was a full speech, right? So on a floor speech is like basically being like, "Yo, this guy's a pain in the ass to deal with," and that's still not enough. That criticism is not to be tolerated. It's wild.
Yeah, and it's like, and as I said, with this and with the Schumer speech, stuff the State of the Union, like I get that like talk is kind of cheap and whatnot, but like I mean the shift in rhetoric is, I mean, as insignificant as it might feel, it's a pretty major shift in how we've seen mainstream political discourse in this country about Israel.
It's definitely like, it's not like reassuring or relieving or even like heartening that it's happening this late in the game.
Sure.
But it is like, one of those things where it's like, finally they admit this guy sucks.
Yeah.
And even that's being met with like, because this isn't even like mask off stuff. This is just finally accepting the terms to some extent.
the fact that you can't criticize someone on the basis of, their national ties or, things like that. It's like everyone on that, like, on like the right would say that is like awful, right? The idea that you can't criticize someone based on like their race or whatever and stuff like that. In fact, they want to criticize them because of that. But they're these same people who are probably also deeply anti-Semitic themselves are the ones, leveraging this, this supposed
Yeah, oh yeah,
concern.
like the Christian Zionism of the American right is probably one of the most anti-Semitic formations that exist in mainstream American politics, right? But they get a fucking pass because they're willing to shore up the money for all of this,
Mhm.
right? Um
And Netanyahu's happy to take it.
yeah, and it's I mean that I think that's like the final thing in this, right? Is like all these people have also been like kind of like complicit in like this like teddy bear image of Netanyahu. You know what I'm saying? Like him and Modi are like similar to me in this regard, where like domestically they will present themselves as these like everyman soft figures,
Mhm.
soft spoken, try to appear wise, all that shit. But like the constituency they represent is anything but, And I mean, in Netanyahu's case, right? Like this equivalency between him and his political reputation and the state of Israel's defense itself is it's a bizarre political fetish that's been created by the American lobby for it. I don't know its origins, but more serious scholars than me should probably take a look at it.
Yeah, for sure.
And I guess another thing, like now let's talk about the peer thing too, just for a bit, because it sounds again like it feels like in the same vein of Biden is finally saying some of the right things, but any mild push for it or any mild questioning reveals like it has not been thought through at all. So it's like it's a peer that will be guarded by the Israelis anyways.
Mm.
Um,
And yeah, that's like kind of like the thing too, whereas it's like, to the extent that we want to keep, American boots off the ground, that limits our options. And and even then, like with like the peer and whatnot, like I mean, like God, like what does that say about what does that inherently say about the Israelis? Right?
I
Like
mean,
we have to construct like an extra thing just so you guys can't block more aid to these people.
I mean, it just goes
We've
to show like
literally seen videos too of like,
I mean the
um
flower massacre is proof enough, right? That
and
like
there was another one too.
fucking hell.
And like there's literally like videos of like, the airdropping of aid followed by like Israeli bombers. Like I mean it couldn't be more transparent if you tried.
Exactly. And I think like to even like readdress like a certain, I don't know. I think anybody who's like playing up the peer is really being cynical to some extent, cuz like you hear it and then you think, "Okay, how is this going to work logistically?" And then the minute you check it, you're like, "Okay, it's not happening." That's what you're telling me. But if it did happen, it would be another way to like commit new like it sounds less like a way to provide aid to Palestine at this point and more of like another like strategy to push into these occupied territories, especially like as Hamas is proving to be effective in resisting the IDF at this point, right? So
Sure, yeah.
I don't know. And just another like thing that I was thinking about in all of this too, right, is that I think we were talking about how like there used to be like no penalty for the support of Israel in the United States, and it's increasingly, fallen out of favor as things have gone by, right? And it's like we can talk about social media playing a role. We can talk about how young people might be more radical in today's day and age, but I think another like factor in all this too is like because of those two aspects, like you've had massive demonstrations of Jewish Americans visibly, vociferously saying "not in my name," you know? And it presents a contradiction at the heart of American involvement in the Zionist project. Because if the diaspora itself does not identify with the project, does not identify with the violence, does not approve of it, of course it's not uniform. Of course there's like internal community dynamics that it's not my place to comment on, right?
Sure, yeah.
People who are willing to counter the narrative and say we're not a monolith, you can't do this in our name, it shatters the existing narrative. So we're seeing like in real time like this I don't know what the language is in political science for this phenomenon, right? But it's like you have people basically captured by the American foreign policy apparatus at this point where they can voice their opposition all they want.
It's pretty similar to like kind of like it's sort of Iron Triangle, bureaucratic capture still. It's just a different apparatus than what we're used to with like a domestic corporation doing it.
Yeah. So it's like like the American public at this point like cannot influence foreign policy at this point. We have no levers of control. But if you're taking like the thesis of Noam Chomsky's manufacturing consent, the consent is no longer able to be manufactured.
Yeah, it's just that it's been manufactured already, and there's like this challenge in fully untangling that, right? And
like the contradiction is a lot more stark and naked than it was before.
And like to the extent that like support has eroded, I don't necessarily take that to mean and maybe this is overly cynical, but like I don't necessarily take that to mean that like opposition is exactly solidified in this country either.
It hasn't.
Like I don't think it's I think a lot of people frankly just don't care.
There is that aspect too, and then the other thing too is like there's no way to really vent this energy, right? Like the undecided campaign is probably like the first line item action that people can take. It's like, okay, you don't like this, vote uncommitted if your state has that option in your primary.
And which like, is what is that like? It's like it's something, right? It's some political exercise, right? But it's not like there's any like there's not a tangible outcome there.
There was an extremely limited potential of what that was, and I still think that like for what it is, planting a flag in the ground is its own kind of victory in a sense.
Sure, right. And I think maybe one of the I mean. To some there's debate over how effective it is, but right. But I mean, kind of.
But it is limited, exactly.
Like political expression is an important part of like the American culture and whatnot. So like that's to the extent that you're able to politically express your view on this subject in a way that feels, more than just like it's a slightly bigger signal than like an angry social media post.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But and I think that's the thing is like in between everybody feeling like like the people who feel unaffected or who don't care, and then the popular anger that can only really be vented in demonstration and like limited acts of effectiveness, like the uncommitted campaign, right?
Yeah.
There's no, I mean, within the system, there's no other like recourse, I would imagine, right? Maybe somehow you could sue the Biden admin, but on what grounds,
Yeah, there's no standing there as an American citizen. And as an international citizen, you can't exactly like sue them. And again, like it's.
I mean, we saw how the International Criminal Court played out. We saw that happen.
Right, and like even if they were found culpable, how culpable would the U.S. and other allies be, right? Like they're honoring their treaties and whatnot, maybe more than they ought to, but I mean, there's kind of yeah, I mean, it's a tricky situation, right? Where just in general, where it's like the U.S., it could certainly be doing better, but it's also has it doesn't have the full capacity to change the situation, right? Unless we
Mhm.
were to occupy Israel, which would be deeply unpopular. Period, right? Like no one. I think people on the left would be. Some of them might be okay with it. Probably more your tanky crowd. Like literally in that case, right? But
Which again, it's like an online contingent, being in favor of that. Like
yeah, like no one like
they
there's
will
such
never
a
have to see like the problems of that. They will never have to exactly.
yeah, and like that's kind of the problem is it's like there's no real appetite for war, and like I think the idea of I mean even then like the idea of occupying Israel until it like dismantles its the apartheid structures of its society and whatnot. I mean that's it sounds great on paper maybe, but it's I mean
I
that's
mean,
a really brutalistic reality, and I don't think it. I mean, I don't even think it sounds that good on paper either.
well, I mean that's the thing, right? Is like I would believe that strategy if the union actually did reconstruction right,
Right? Yeah. I mean, like obviously we don't have a tremendous track record of spreading democracy at
Hell,
home or abroad.
if you look at the Marshall Program, I don't even know how to count that as a W. But anyways, anyhow,
No,
it's
financially, it's a big W. I mean,
for
that's
Europe, yeah, but like
well,
for
I mean,
Europe,
even here, right? Because they paid us back.
I mean,
Um,
yeah, but like Fordism kind of dried out, so I don't know, I don't know.
sure, yeah.
So like as Biden is kind of slipping into this weird liminal space, um, I think it would be remiss not to bring up that like there was the Kamala soft launch a couple weeks ago.
And it's kind of been sticking around. So yeah, like with Kamala, I've commented on this show, I'm sure a few times that like it has felt like she's been like very awkwardly silent through
All of
most
this.
of most of the Biden administration as a whole, right? And more recent and like before that, right? Obviously, she was kind of like put on like the task force for like whatever like embarrassing political situation was occurring at any given point, right? You have the please don't come, like all of like those like kind of memeable, pathetic moments, um, early in the Biden years. But recently, we've been seeing this kind of different approach from her, right? Where there's been like she's been out publicly a little bit more where she's, voiced opposition to what's happening in Israel. Putting out sympathy for the Palestinians. Recently, she just did a thing where I guess she's trying to get marijuana rescheduled on like the
Mm-hmm.
federal like drug uh crap, what is it? They move it away
The
from a
schedule
scheduled one.
list, right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So like yeah, like there's been like this effort and like there's I I I don't know how much weight I'd put into it, right? But I mean like let's just concede that like Joe Biden is old. And yes, I think the State of the Union speech I think it quiets the media narrative, like harping on his age, right? Because he was, lively through that and didn't, he had like some of his stutters, which are just, sort of, he's always done that. Nothing unusual. Or particularly bothersome in my opinion.
I
But
mean, the stutter isn't the troubling aspect, and I think for anyone who's like hung up on the stutter itself, that's not.
I usually think it's bad faith.
Yeah, I think it's usually in bad faith. It's less like the stutter and more of the content of the speech that's concerning. That's really what
Ye-
it comes down to.
Yeah, and I think obviously people have to acknowledge there's like good days and bad days for any elderly folks usually, but it's one of those things where it's like I think it's going to quiet the media narrative around that age question for a little bit at least, but he's still old. There's a non-0% chance that something could happen before the election, before even the party convention, right? And for whatever reason, maybe Kamala would need to step up into that role. And even regardless, right? I think one of the things that could help people with the age question is have people see Kamala as more competent just in general, right? And I think like tying her to this stuff is actually a good idea. For either outcome, right? Either she's the VP who may be forced to assume command, or she could end up being the actual candidate because of what happens to the president before the election or something like that. But yeah, it's one of those things that's like it's interesting seeing there being this soft launch, as you would put it.
Yeah, and there's at this point especially there's a lot of like very ephemeral discussion when it comes to what could happen at the convention, right? We've made jokes about, was Gavin Newsom trying to do a soft launch when he debated DeSantis?
Well, and that was like the whole last part of the debate, right? Was like Kennedy trying to press him if that's what he's like going after, which was like this weird, like I felt like I was totally detached from the discourse moment. On that.
Yeah, because it's like I don't know, because this was the assumption from 2020, right? There was discourse about, are they going to try to soft launch Andrew Cuomo to take over at the convention for Biden? Because there are already concerns about Biden's.
They were soft launching him. It was just a question if they were going to hard launch him after that.
Well, he can hard launch himself, as it turns out.
Right.
Oh God, forgive me. Anyways, it's like, I don't know. There's always a part of me that's like, what if there is like a contested convention and Andrew Cuomo like pops out the back with a folding chair?
Yeah, I mean that's
watch out!
Yeah, that's a nightmare scenario. I mean, I'll even regardless of these new positions, or maybe clarified positions or whatever, from Kamala, regardless of those, I would take her in a heartbeat over Cuomo.
At this rate, yeah, there's
at any rate, I would take her over Cuomo, even without the accusations against Cuomo. Like,
oh my God, I mean, because that's the thing is like, on the subject of New York, right? Like Kathy Hochul's like decision to like send the National Guard into the NYC subway. Like it looks insane, but like if you like just understanding everything I do about Cuomo, like he kind of set up the ground for that, like with this like
she's just more of the same.
Yeah, exactly. Like this tough on crime narrative that's been going on since the pandemic, like I know Democrats.
Well, I mean, it's been going on way longer than that.
I mean, it has, but like I think like just this current iteration, maybe if that counts, right? You can't deny that Cuomo was definitely the type to lean into it.
Mm-hmm.
He definitely like carved a way for Democratic executives to like lean into it for sure. And it's like, again, like you were saying with Kathy Hochul being more of the same. It's like the New York machine can definitely, furnish a couple backbenchers if the National Party can't.
And I hope it doesn't. Like it's because I mean the New York machine is, I mean, God, like for all the faults that like the National Party has, the New York machine is awful.
The problem is you guys want a functioning party, then you get mad at me when it functions. What's your problem?
I mean, it doesn't even really function that well.
I mean, it doesn't, because it's like they take the role that the Republicans take in any other state. It's crazy. Not to say that New York Republicans are progressive or anything, but
right, yeah. But like, I mean, like think about the way they enable like the Republican opposition, right? I mean, all the redistricting stuff. I mean, you allowed Santos in, and I guess
Santos is back now too. Apparently,
Santos. So like, he was there at the State of the Union. We at first assumed he had to be someone's guest, but it turns out he still has floor access. He could tell his term would have naturally expired, or he's criminally charged, or at least convicted. Obviously, he's already been charged.
Oh
And
boy.
then he filed to run for office literally during the State of the Union. He's running in, was it New York's first district? There's an incumbent there who was elected at the same time he was, so that would be a primary. Almost certainly. I doubt that guy's going to be stepping aside. A questionable choice. I was talking about one of my friends, and he was like, well, like you can use campaign fundraising to pay for legal fees.
Wait,
And
what?
yeah. Yep, you can use that to pay for I mean that's what we're getting out of Trump too, right? In a lot of cases is using, campaign cash to pay off legal fines and whatnot. But that's probably what he intends to do is, he's running to pay off, pay his attorneys or whatever. The problem, of course, with that is the fact that his campaign was in the red last time. Like he was in debt because people asked for refunds. So I don't know who is possibly going to bankroll this campaign. I'm sure there's someone dumb enough out there, but
Listen, if you're in New York and you see a letterhead that reads Devolder, run. If you have an invoice mailed to you from Devolder and Associates, you may be caught up in fraud. I ain't gonna hold you.
right.
Yeah, so I'm seeing his this is Nick Lolota, U.S. House of Representative.
Yeah, he's barely been there, but you will notice that the one of the few highlights on his article is that he was one of the first people to call into an investigation of George Santos. So maybe a little bit of petty revenge at play too.
Yeah. Which this could be probably one of the funniest primaries if there's any videos that come out.
Oh yeah, I'm sure this would be hilarious.
This would be amazing.
Yeah, and you've got the Boebert one that's interesting now too, because the person that she was running to replace, because she switched districts, he announced that he'll be resigning next week, which is going to prompt a special election. And if she were to run in that, she would have to drop out of Congress. She said that she's not going to be doing that. So, that leads it to an interesting scenario, right? Where all of her other primary challengers probably are going to be doing the same thing. And they are now much more likely to win that seat. And in general, right, I think her choice to not run in her old district, like I know she had a really tight margin last time, but it's interesting that, as someone who is like supposedly like kind of a true believer, she's opted to like Trump is on the ballot, right? And she's just assuming there's no coattail effect that's going to carry her to victory.
That's a weird calculation.
Yeah, it is. Like, I mean, and it's funny because like her not running for that seat, I think is almost certainly going to cost Republicans that seat, or like because she would probably be the best one to carry it, just because she's the incumbent.
Mm-hmm. I cannot begin to understand Boebert. Like, MTG was bad enough for my brain, and then every time I try understanding anything about Boebert, it just breaks me. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, they both sort of represent that, sort of the modern American microcosm, right? Like you've got, just horny on Maine mixed with, deeply reactionary policies. Like,
yeah, I mean that's another thing. Like they were talking about this on Chapo like a couple episodes ago, where like there's this like weird quality to like the Trump brand and like the Trump affiliated like conservative movement, right? Where it's like it will present as evangelical, it will present as like Protestant Christian, but none of these people are particularly religious or conservative in that sense. It's more about like using it as a means to like mock or belittle queer people or people who they disapprove of, but then fundamentally also have deviated from the norm and like need a pass for it. And I
Yeah.
think the past is always, well, at least I'm straight. That's how it always reads to me. I don't know.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, you're not wrong.
While we're talking about Congress too, right? I think we would be remiss not to also bring up Mitch McConnell stepping down as the Senate Majority Leader.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about writing like a whole like profiles and shame for this, but like that would be a 10-part series, honestly. I don't think we have time for like
Yeah, I mean that's fair, right? I mean, and a lot of people know the ways that this guy's awful, right?
he's been in the spotlight enough for people to notice at this point, I think.
Yeah, I mean he's kind of to the extent that Newt Gingrich and like the Contract of America, Republican Revolution, to the extent that that sort of broke politics and led to our increased polarization and whatnot. McConnell under Obama, I think, took it to its next level, especially right. Like I think that's and I think that Trump kind of completed that evolution, but I don't think you get a Trump without McConnell, to be honest.
You don't, yeah.
His ability to defang the Obama agenda, I think, really played a role in sort of just creating like the space for grievance politics in 2016. I think just in general, I mean, like obviously the court was one of his main priorities. The way he denied appointment to Merrick Garland, which to be fair might have been kind of a two birds of one stone scenario, right? You have you obviously get that seat guaranteed for a committed Republican justice with Gorsuch. In 2017, and then you have a deeply ineffective attorney general with Merrick Garland getting that pity appointment in 2021. So, just like kind of bad stuff all around. And, as you had noted, right, there's sort of like this kind of interesting timing with his sister-in-law. Did she like drown in like a Tesla?
It was bizarre. Basically, like her Tesla like backed into a pond on her property. I don't know if it was a Cybertruck or whatever Tesla model it was, but we talked about Teslas being unreliable 1,000 times over on this show at this point, anyways. And it was just the kind of thing where it's like you get in your Tesla, backs you into the water, you're trapped. And she just couldn't get out and was drowned in her own car, right? I don't know enough to be like this is foul play for something, but at the same time, if it entertains anybody or if someone wants to go off the deep end, Chapo was making a joke about like, oh, Cocaine Mitch and his like transport and like distribution connections, right? Whether it was through Elaine Chao, and in this case, this is Elaine Chao's sister, right? So she was like the head of some like shipping company. So I don't know. I don't know if there was some kind of corporate malfeasance involved in this. I don't know if Elon Musk, got on his like bootleg like laptop and then like put the wrong like JSON input in, and then suddenly like it set a random Tesla user to go backwards when they shouldn't have. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily get it. It is an interesting circumstance too, and I mean, I guess kind of going full circle with what we discussed with, China and TikTok earlier, right? I mean, there's proof of concept, right, that it's a lot of hot air. I mean, obviously, McConnell's wife, Elaine Chao. I mean, they've got a ton of business ties. I mean, it's a Chinese family. They have a ton of business ties there and in the States. She's been in multiple presidential cabinets.
Right.
As I think was she transportation secretary both
under
times?
Trump, yeah.
What was she under? Bush. She was under Bush as well, right?
Let me check. I mean,
Labor under Bush.
Okay, wow, that's
and director of the Peace Corps under H.W. Bush, and deputy secretary of transportation under him as well.
That's it. Oh, she's from Taiwan. That's
okay. Well, there we go. Then we get
there we go. She's definitely I definitely know what's when it comes to the China-Taiwan shadow war that America wants to get involved with. I know where she falls. Perfect. Okay. Oh, brother.
Which is funny because everyone always like McConnell like never pushes back on like ads that are about like him and his like China family. like from like the Don Blankenship ad. If you've ever seen that one,
God,
it's a total disaster. Yeah, it's weird. I didn't know she was from there, but
I mean, just in general, like this is a side tangent, right? But it's like America has always been intimately involved with China, not just like, with the sweetheart deal that Nixon got with Deng Xiaoping, but it's also like
sure.
in China's imperial history, when Britain is carving it up like a fucking pie, America got a good piece. America was
Yeah.
part of Allied forces during the fucking Boxer Rebellion and all this stuff, right? So, there is a weird cultural blind spot to China that Americans as a whole, I'm not going to say just white Americans, I'm going to say like Americans of all stripes are just willfully blind to for whatever reason. And I think it's like, regardless of someone's opinions of, the Chinese government, however they feel about it, reconciling this like bizarre black hole in like American like cultural memories, it's critical to actually making sense of some of this. And like this is again just another side tangent. Like I was telling you that I read what was that book, How to Hide an Empire.
Yeah,
Daniel Immerwahr's book. It's really fucking good. And like the segments on the Philippines especially, and just like other like segments of the book, like America has had such a like predatory presence in the Pacific ever before World War II that we just don't. It's just in a cultural dead zone, right? We just don't think about it. That like even within conservative circles, it's fascinating, right? Like Trump being like, or sorry, McConnell being a white guy with an Asian wife. That whole like archetype is funny, right? Like,
yeah.
And still getting like shit from other conservatives for that is interesting. And then even when like you look at Asians within like the American conservative cohort, that bizarre brand of like racism still gets applied to them, and they're never seen as like 100% part of the core, even if they're as like ideological. I mean, in the Chinese case, if they're as anti-communist as their white counterparts, that never gets taken seriously either, I've noticed.
Yeah,
What,
I think that's...
what was the one George Bush lawyer, John Woo, is that the guy's name?
There is a lawyer, John Woo, but let's see. Not sure. I don't remember him as thoroughly.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out who gave the authority that like when I'm trying to think of who their legal counsel was when it came down to like the Guantanamo torture.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's John Yu. So he's not Chinese, but he's Korean, right? And he was basically the author of the torture memos during the War on Terror, right? So it's like we've talked about this like whole phenomenon on the show before, right? Where it's like demographics and ideology in the United States are not always 100% consistent. And when you want to psychologize or understand non-white membership or activity in like American conservative groups, it's probably just as wild as when you examine white people who participate in the same spaces, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Anyhow, I don't think we're going to be the investigators who crack the case on Mitch McConnell's sister-in-law. Probably not us.
No, I mean, even if it isn't like, my general field, it's I don't know if it's really worth my time to really like delve that much deeper into him, right? I mean, it's there's not a lot of mysteries. It's just kind of a pit of despair, right? Where it's like, oh, did you know that he also did this horrible thing too? I mean, of note, right? I mean, like, since announcing that he's going to be stepping down from leadership, he's still putting, party over country. He's endorsed Biden. Something that Pence is not even doing, which he was like, it should come as no surprise in his speech. Where I was like, dude, you were a breath away from endorsing hanging Mike Pence
Right.
throughout that entire primary. You cannot pretend that this was like, a foregone conclusion that you weren't going to endorse your former boss. You're your own attempted murderer.
Oh my god. Like that Pence is a case of you got to put yourself out to pasture and just shut up.
I guess that was it, right?
Yeah.
That was putting himself out to pasture, and unlikely you'll hear from him again until, like, if Biden wins, they'll be like, oh, well, this is what Biden needs to do. He needs to be a president for conservatives like me or something like that.
Oh my god. So
Joining the K6 of the world.
Yeah, oh, fucking Kate. That's another person I don't fucking miss. Like Mike DeWine was just like a perfect like cut and dry replacement. I do not like see a niche that hasn't been unfulfilled
Right.
by that guy. Exactly. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And then with Mitch McConnell stepping down, another ghoul also is not biting the dust. But Kristen Sinema will be retiring from the Senate.
Yep, heading to K Street probably. If I had to guess.
That's always been the bet. Like I think we already had a theory about, her like alleged centrist viewpoint as never being sincere and always about like realizing how much influence being like a centrist Democratic senator gives you, because you get to basically hold up a lot of
the only thing that's like cautioning me on that like outcome, like where it's like, I think that's like definitely what she wants, is like I can see like, because like the one challenge to it has been that like people think that she's like just burned way too many bridges and she doesn't have like a lot of like good connections. So that's
she's burned bridges
that
with
might temper it.
I mean, she might have burned bridges within like the traditional like Democratic Party network, but I think there's probably a couple industries where she definitely,
sure, but like the utility that she's able to provide them is reduced.
It's possible, yeah.
Because like, I mean, they the reason that like former members of Congress are like such popular, lobbyists is because like, well, hey, like, yeah, they know, one, how the process works, and two, they know people on the Hill that they can go like, hey, when Joe Lieberman retired, right? He can go into McCain's office and tell him like exactly how to vote on particular bills or whatever, or work with him on different legislation, or he had other connections. But her, it's like there's kind of this open question about who does she really have. It's not Manchin, because he's also going to be gone as well. So that's a little bit older news now, but still, like, it's like
I missed that. I've completely missed that.
Yeah, that was God, when did he? I think it was literally. I think we might have covered it briefly. It was right before the end of the year. Yeah, November of last year.
Okay. Chuck Schumer suggests Joe Manchin may yet run for re-election to save seat. What the fuck?
Well, I mean, I guess maybe.
This dude Joe Manchin cannot commit to a damn thing.
No, he can't.
Oh my god.
Well, I thought it was funny. Like, apparently, like one of the books I was reading was saying that how Schumer got Manchin's vote on the Inflation Reduction Act was that he had reported like, oh, I just met with him and he said he's a hard no on this. So arguing that Schumer was committed against it forced him to vote for the bill because there was just so much public backlash. So like that's how bad he is with commitment.
Oh my god. R.I.P. Bozo to all of them. That's right. How I feel. Oh my gosh. Okay.
And Sinema, like, obviously a much briefer political history, but like one that's kind of wrought with betrayal. Right, there was sort of expectations that she would not be anything like she was when she was in office.
Yeah, with Kristen Sinema, it's like I don't even know where to begin with her, and like you would need, I would almost want like someone more familiar with like Arizona state politics to maybe explain her background, right? Because like
Hmm.
she made this name for herself as like this Green Party figure, what people would allege to be like, left wing, if not left of center, and then, crosses over to the Democratic Party. That's not always selling out, although in some cases it might be, right? But it's not necessarily like she's never been ideologically consistent, and I think that's like a
No.
misnomer with like people's conceptions of the Green Party as a whole, right? Because
I think the Green Party, especially, right, is just sort of
it's a catch. I mean, in terms of like big tent ideology, Green parties across the world are wildly inconsistent.
it's like a big tent that has like a million holes in the roof.
Yeah,
Right? Like it's
yeah,
just it's so broad, but like there's like all these like gaps where like you don't really fit in, and it's never been particularly good when it comes to really anything, I guess, but
yeah. Because like,
yeah.
because if you look at Greens in like in Europe, especially, right? Like, you've got like those like proto-Nazi types almost in their ranks, and then when you look at Green
Yeah.
parties in the United States, you have like a weird mix of like old school environmental activists. So like their movement isn't nearly as like intersectional. It's a little more focused
Yeah.
on like older paradigms of looking at ecology. It's a little more focused on like like it's like
And not as focused on like broad coalition building.
definitely not. You have like progressives who have been burned by the Democratic Party who like join the ranks. I don't know what their rate of return is with involvement in those fronts. Then you have like all kinds of like people who didn't make it in one space, so they get there and try to like advance some kind of thing, right? But it's always been like a grab bag. It's never been particularly consistent or um, cohesive in my reading. Probably someone from the Green Party is going to hear this and get mad, and I will say I'm sorry, but you know,
You
for
gotta
my
have
money,
some level of self awareness if you're working
I,
at the
I
Green Party,
mean,
I would
I,
hope.
I mean, listen, I am the first one to admit to being a dumbass. So like, if people are like, "I do you need to be more self aware," I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, what do especially like the libertarians, I would argue, are the same boat, right? It's like, what do the Green Party and Libertarian Party do in America other than yell at people every 4 years during a presidential election?
Yeah.
Do they engage people in off years? That's a genuine question.
I mean, the closest that like the hot second Cornell West was running for their nomination last year felt like it. And obviously that was in the build up to a presidential election, but I mean that's at least something more than they usually do, right? Usually it is just the presidential election. And like there's like and to some extent, right, I mean it's a product of like, party membership and lack of organization and whatnot, but like there's kind of an element too, right, where it's like the primaries for like the Green Party and the Libertarian Party and all that, like it's deeply undemocratic, right? It's that they more or less just like appoint someone that they think would, be a decent candidate for whatever, arcane reason. They read the tea leaves or whatever and decided that that was the fit. Um, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm thinking about like in 2016 with Jill Stein's
Jill
first
Stein, yeah.
run. Yeah, and then like getting like Ajamu Baraka as like the VP, and like this is like a Black Panther style guy or like a Black nationalist figure, right? It's like that is the most grab bag approach um to third party politics in America I've ever seen. Like where are you
Well, and
building
like,
the
was Jill
coalition out
Stein
of?
was she literally just picked because someone had an idea for like the Jill Not Hill slogan?
I don't fucking know. I really don't know. Like what is their procedure for like nominations and stuff? Because the Libertarians had their nomination through C-SPAN and it involved a striptease. That's all I'm aware of, and that was embarrassing. That's all I'm aware of. But like, does the Green Party do televised events? Do they have? I'm okay. Now I'm just looking this up for curiosity.
Well, and again, it's like we have like all of like, like digital media is like more accessible than ever and whatnot. Yet you have no
Like, of course we're talking shit, right? But at the same time, I'm like, I don't know. Maybe it's because I don't live in Ann Arbor. I don't know about any of this. Okay, national meetings. Listen, I will be the first to admit I wasn't paying attention to any of this and I didn't know.
Yeah, I
However,
mean, it's like to me, it's like weird where you have like with how accessible like social media is and like digital media in general, right? Like, I mean, just like you could Twitch stream some stuff, and with like a competent level of production value, if you really wanted to like highlight your candidates and stuff like that, but they just don't really,
yeah, I'm really not sure what to make of the
or
Green Party.
organize just more broadly outside of presidential like races.
Yeah, because it's like in theory, especially like because I've never been anti-crank. As far as like
Pro crank.
I'll pro crank. I am in favor of cranking it. I think you should have cranks in city council, whatever city board you got, a couple state offices. Get a couple cranks in there. Really, just get wild with it. Get a guy who's like nutty about the Roman Empire. Why not? But um, you'd think like state races would be like a easier like target, and like some of these might even be easier low hanging fruit to obtain.
I think it's my guess is that like it would require organization from a lot of people out of state, and they wouldn't see it as worthwhile. But I don't. I mean, like I think they've just done so little in like building any like groundwork or ground game that it's just hard to do that.
Yeah, and it's like it seems like I mean, we're just really talking smack about the Green Party at this point now, but it's like and I think this applies maybe to the American left more broadly, regardless of Democratic or Green Party affiliation, right? Is like regionality always plays a role even if we try not to acknowledge it. And it's like,
Sure.
let's just look at Michigan as an example, right? Like people can take a look at like Ann Arbor and be like, well, it's, you've got so many political radicals here, the Republicans don't really have a foothold, blah, blah, blah. Democratic Party membership is high, Green Party membership is high, they got an active DSH, all this shit, right? And it's like, it's a college town surrounded by farms.
Yeah.
And it's it's a very big college surrounded by intellectuals, Um, it's an enclave more than it is like a unique political formation. Like you take the University of Michigan out of that, and what happens?
Right.
It just turns into some like does that formation still exist? I don't fucking know.
Yeah, exactly.
And even then, like universities themselves like don't necessitate bold or radical or progressive ideas among like the people that congregate around them. Like our school was a little more conservative just because of like where we were located.
Yeah.
Wayne State actually has a history. Like it's even though it's located in the city of Detroit, like if you read books like Detroit, I Do Mind Dying, they get into it where it's like this university, even if it's like in a hotbed of like black radical and union radical activity, is hostile to left wing formations within its student body. You know what I'm saying? And this has been like since the 50s and 60s. So I don't know. Like I want to think of like a terminology like political ecology or something like that, where it's like you have to understand like the historical and economic forces that shape political constituencies,
Mm-hmm.
because ideology is like it ends up being shorthand in a lot of political discourse where it's being like, well, that guy's a liberal, well, that person used to be a Green Party member, blah 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 blah. But functionally, Kristen Sinema ended up being a centrist through her whole career,
Sure, yeah.
regardless of ideological markers.
Yeah, and that's as helpful as like some of those ideological markers can be, especially trying to ascertain something out of like because it's hard to follow like things political and whatnot. They're not always perfect, right? And she's like kind of a good case study in that being the case.
Yeah, it was all aesthetic, like presentation with her, is like like the arts and crafts like aesthetic, right? But
Mm-hmm.
doing the kawaii uwu while like telling people they can't have healthcare, that says less about contradictions in her political views and maybe more about just the state of American culture as neoliberalism gets worse, as the market drives everything. Who's to say?
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, I think this one takes the record for like most diversions, most tangents, most unhinged digressions. I mean,
I don't know. I mean,
now that we hit 101, like we've just said fuck it.
yeah, the quality of the show for the next 100 episodes is going to go rapidly downhill.
I think no. I mean, I don't think this is a dive in quality.
No,
I
no,
just
no.
think
I don't think it was either.
no. I think it's like as the show matures, as the listeners can definitely see, right? It's like we have the choice to like continue doing, because let's revisit maybe just the topic we were talking about at the start of this, right? Where it's like political media on the left versus the right, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, there has been an explosion of like left wing media, streams, podcasts, YouTube channels, content production in the left media industrial complex sphere, whatever you want to call it, is probably at its peak. I don't see it stopping anytime soon per se, right? I think a couple channels have maybe been shut down justifiably. I think a lot of community beef continues to exist. Um, but in terms of like, podcasts, in terms of like YouTube channels, in terms of like high follower count social media that drives engagement, that is like that's the niche platforms that the American left seems to thrive on, right? Rather than being captured by like the Daily Caller's media ecosystem, you can kind of a la carte pick out shows, streams, podcasts, whatever, and then you can mix in books and like whatever media you want within it. But I think a lot of people don't see themselves as sitting within media production as a market space, and that like affects people. If you're trying to like have a Patreon to produce your content and you're trying to make money off of it, that's understandable. I understand that like a lot of people would rather have a job where they can do stuff like this that they enjoy, and then they can maybe see it as like more enjoyable or maybe even more ethical income, right? But again, then you're competing for eyeballs with everybody, and it drives you down the same roads. I don't know. Maybe you got I don't know, like you there was an anecdote someone was sharing. I think it might have been the Trillbillies. I forgot which podcast it was, where like someone was telling a friend like, I was a musician and then I realized I wasn't making music. At the end of the day, I was selling t-shirts. And now I see you with this podcast and I also see you selling t-shirts. How different are we really at the end of the day, right?
Sure, yeah.
But it's like, again, like I think like greenhouse gaslighting will continue to always be the space where like people can shoot this shit and like really just get into the reads. And I think
Possibly sell some t-shirts.
possibly sell some t-shirts, a couple stickers, couple Twitch streams where we like subject ourselves to the worst excesses of Republican debates. Who knows?
That's true. Yeah.
The world's your oyster.
Yeah.
All right. I think we started this like what 1 o'clock. We got, you know, if TikTok is slop, we have slop fortified with nutrients.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, yeah. I think that's really everything I got for today. Is there anything else that you want to leave the audience with, or anything else we might have missed?
You know, I can't think of anything else. I think we're pretty exhaustive with everything.
Yeah, we beat this outline to death, folks. It's oof. We will be back sooner rather than later. You know, as always, where you can follow us online and other show details are in the show notes, in the description. Till next time, folks, thanks for listening. Take care, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.